The 8-layer chocolate cake shot through the air like a sweet bullet, and then pop it exploded against Dr. Lauren Carter's left cheek. The sound shattered the elegant laughter that had filled the Liberty Foundation Gala, held inside the gilded halls of the Astoria Grand Hotel, the golden polis of Manhattan. In that instant, the entire ballroom stopped breathing. The violins fell silent, leaving only the soft thud of falling cake, a few gasps, and the trembling of wine glasses in stunned hands. At the center of the chandelier's glow, surrounded by a sea of silk and diamonds, stood Charlotte Whitmore, the 35-year-old hostess and heiress of the illustrious Whitmore family. She tilted her head and smiled cold as ice. Her wavy blonde hair cascaded over her shoulders, catching the light like strands of silver. To her, tonight wasn't just a gala, it was a performance. And Lauren Carter, the honored guest now dripping in chocolate, was an uninvited actress. Charlotte lifted her champagne glass, her voice as sweet as honey laced with poison. "I suppose money still can't buy class." A soft laugh echoed. Then 2, then 3. Within seconds, the entire room erupted into cruel, chaotic laughter. Lauren stood there, surrounded by the walls of that merciless sound. Thick, dark cream dripped from her temple down to her neck, staining her emerald silk gown, once a symbol of her grace and success, now a wound, bleeding humiliation. She said nothing. She didn't move. Not a single word of protest. Around her, tycoons, politicians, models, and journalists all tried to hide their discomfort behind forced smiles. No one dared to intervene. This was Charlotte Whitmore's domain, the Queen of New York's elite, the woman who could erase anyone from existence with a single phone call. From a corner of the room, whispers began to slither through the crowd. Who is she? Some kind of CEO, but clearly not our kind. Can you believe she wore emerald green to Charlotte's gala, each word cut through the air like shards of shattered glass? Yet Lauren remained silent. Her eyes didn't drop to the floor. She looked straight at Charlotte, not with hatred or fear, but with the calm stillness of a storm that hadn't yet broken. Slowly she raised her hand and wiped the chocolate from her cheek. The motion was so gentle it almost seemed meaningless, but the faint sound scrape rang out like steel slicing through the heavy silence. A bit of frosting fell to the marble floor. Click, the sound was small, yet it rippled through the room like a tremor. A few smiles faded. Charlotte's blue eyes narrowed, the arrogance within them beginning to shift into doubt. Still, she smiled the smile of someone too familiar with power. "Don't look at me like that, darling," she said softly, her voice carrying across the ballroom. "Someone like you should know where you belong." Lauren didn't reply. She simply exhaled, barely audible. In the front row, Gregory Dalton, the 62-year-old tycoon and chief donor of the foundation, looked torn. He cleared his throat, half ready to intervene, half afraid to get pulled into the storm. "This isn't right," he muttered under his breath, but his words drowned beneath the laughter of the women gathered around Charlotte. Ava Sinclair, Brooke Langley, and Paige Monroe, the crowned faces of Manhattan's upper class. "Oh, Charlotte, that was savage!" Ava shrieked laughter, sharp as glass. Charlotte met her gaze with a look of pure satisfaction. The laughter spread like wildfire, licking across every face in the room. Those who still had a shred of conscience stared down at their glasses, pretending to check their phones. No one wanted to be the first to challenge the Queen. But in that silence, Lauren Carter began to transform. She was no longer the humiliated victim. She was the epicenter. Every curious gaze, every phone camera turned toward her, But this time not out of mockery, but because no one could look away from that terrifying calm. Inside Charlotte's chest, a strange unease began to stir. Not joy, but the chill of uncertainty. She tried to smother it with a brittle laugh. Come now, don't let the mood die. Someone start the music again. The orchestra scrambled violins, trembling back to life, but the melody sounded thin and distorted. The room remained heavy, suffocating. All eyes, all souls were drawn to the woman in the emerald gown, her face streaked with chocolate, standing perfectly still, like a divine statue, amid the ruins of a collective madness. She didn't scream. She didn't seek justice. She just stood there, spine straight, head high. In her mind, she heard her mother's voice. You don't need to speak to earn respect, Lauren. You just need to stand until they're the ones who bow. Tonight, among the silver gowns, the metallic smiles, and the false laughter, those words became her compass. Lauren closed her eyes for a brief moment, took a slow breath, and in that breath something sparked, not shame, but strategy. Because in this world, nothing is more powerful than the silence of someone who knows where real power lies. The room still echoed with laughter, but now it sounded forced, uncertain. Camera flashes flickered, capturing the image of a woman standing amid the stains of arrogance. And none of the onlookers realized that in that instant they had handed her the stage of her life. In that fractured music, in the clinking of glasses, and the trembling light, a new chapter of power quietly began. The laughter was no longer sound, it was a blade polished with wine and arrogance. It swirled around Lauren Carter, cutting through her skin, grazing her heart. But it could not pierce the soul that had long been forged by fire. In the center of the Astoria Grand Ballroom, beneath chandeliers that hung like the teardrops of power, she stood there silent, as a statue carved from jade, so breathtakingly composed, it was almost frightening. Charlotte Whitmore swirled her champagne glass, her diamond-studded wrist shimmering as though each stone was a piece of the status she had inherited. Her smile widened, graceful, yet venomous. Actually, Charlotte began her voice drawn out and deliberate. I don't blame you, Lauren. You simply don't understand how this place works. Some doors will never open for people like you. A small gasp rippled through the crowd behind her, followed by gleeful hisses. Someone giggled. Someone else raised their phone camera, flashing. Every flash of light was an invisible whip. Lauren still did not respond. She tilted her head slightly, just enough for her neatly pinned dark hair to shift, and her eyes deep, steady, and quiet like mountain stone after a storm locked onto Charlotte. No one could tell what she was thinking, but something beneath the surface was moving heavy and dangerous, like molten rock beneath the polished floor of that lavish gala. In the front row, Gregory Dalton, the seasoned investor, adjusted his tie. He looked at Lauren, then at Charlotte. He had witnessed hundreds of galas, countless battles between the highborn. But something was different tonight. The silence around Lauren unsettled him, like the moment before a market crash. From the corner, the young socialites, Ava Sinclair, Brooke Langley, and Paige Monroe, joined in Charlotte's laughter. Ava leaned forward, lifting her glass. Come on, Charlotte. Don't be mad at her. Maybe she thinks wearing designer clothes makes her royalty. The crowd erupted again. Some laughed to curry favor, others looked around, uncertain. Lauren heard every word. Each insult fell on her like drops of poison rain, but instead of soaking in, they slid off, harmless, meaningless. Inside her, a memory stirred, the image of her mother, the woman who once taught her to keep her head high while walking through neighborhoods that stared at them like outsiders. If they look at you with contempt, let them look until they're the ones who feel ashamed. Lauren's eyes opened again, her gaze returning to the present. Tonight, those who mocked her were revealing themselves for what they truly were. A small metallic ting rang out. Someone had dropped a silver spoon. The sound was faint, but sharp, stretching like the first crack across a pane of glass. Charlotte didn't notice. She was still performing her role as queen. "Ladies and gentlemen," she declared, raising her glass, high a toast to generosity, and to those who still believe money can buy everything, including class. The laughter roared once more, louder and more shrill than before. Travis Mercer, a venture capitalist nearby, raised his phone and began recording a close-up of Lauren's face. He whispered, "This clip will be all over the internet before midnight." Lauren heard him. Her brow tightened slightly, not out of fear of being filmed, but out of pity for those who thought they were in control of the story, because they had no idea that within days the very footage they shared would become the evidence of their downfall. A young waiter, his hands trembling, stepped forward holding a tray of napkins. His eyes flickered with sympathy, but the event director quickly motioned for him to step back. No one was allowed to interfere with Charlotte's performance. Lauren saw him. She gave a small nod of thanks, even though he hadn't helped. That single gesture made his heart ache. In a ballroom full of masks, she was the only one real. Charlotte took another sip of champagne, her lips glinting gold. "Oh, Lauren, don't just stand there. Say something. Or do you have nothing to say?" The crowd joined in. "Yes, say something." A shrill voice followed. Maybe she's afraid of ruining her chance to beg Charlotte for sponsorship. Lauren drew a deep breath, not out of anger, but to steady herself amid the smoke of perfume and deceit. Slowly she lifted her untouched glass of wine. Her hands were steady. She set it back down on the table so gently it made no sound. That silence, so stark against the surrounding noise, made a few people stop laughing. Gregory Dalton leaned slightly toward the man beside him and murmured, "Don't you see it? She's not breaking. She's calculating." He was right. Lauren wasn't defending herself. She was observing. Every gesture, every smirk, every glance, she recorded them all like mapping terrain. Not for revenge born of emotion, but for strategy. She knew perfectly well that in their world, honor wasn't measured by virtue, but by shares, and in that game, she was no underdog. Charlotte pressed on, leaning forward, her voice sweet as honey and sharp as glass. "You know, Lauren, I admire your courage. To walk into a place where you don't belong. But next time, maybe ask first who's allowed to stand next to whom." A round of false applause followed. Lauren's eyes swept across the room. Some faces lowered, others looked away. But something had shifted. The silence within her was no longer defensive. It was spreading. Charlotte began to notice. She looked around and saw that a few people were no longer laughing. The air felt heavier. Lauren took one step forward. Just one, but the sound of her heel against the marble floor click echoed louder than the orchestra. Their eyes met. And in that instant, Charlotte, who had always believed she was the center of the universe, suddenly realized she was only a flicker of light within a growing shadow. Lauren didn't need to speak. Her silence was speaking for her, clear, powerful, and far more terrifying than words. Then, in a voice soft as wind, but heavy as the sky, she said, "Sometimes Charlotte true class isn't proven by laughter. but by how one faces silence. The entire ballroom fell still. No one dared move. Only the faint trembling of Charlotte's champagne glass could be heard, small but audible to all. That night, beneath the dazzling light of crystal chandeliers, for the first time, the one who had been worshipped felt small, and the one who had been humiliated began to shine. The violins began to play again, but the music no longer sounded like Vivaldi's graceful harmony. It was a funeral march. The melody quivered offbeat, colliding with marble walls and shattering in the air, heavy as molten iron. At the center of the grand hall, Charlotte Whitmore still stood, but the smile on her lips had twisted. Her wine-red lips had gone dry, and her eyes, once glimmering, now looked dull and brittle like cracking glass. Yet she tried to maintain her authority. One hand clenched her wine-glass, while the other crossed over her chest, as if holding together the fragments of her fading confidence. "You're quite good at staying composed," Charlotte said, her voice lower now, though still forced through clenched teeth. "I suppose in your world, people learn to endure to survive." A few scattered laughs broke the silence, but unlike before, the laughter now sounded hollow and tired, as if even those who made it were no longer sure whose side they were on. Lauren Carter didn't respond. She simply placed her hand over her chest, feeling her heartbeat steady and calm. Around her, whispers spread through the crowd, the tone shifting from ridicule to unease. At the VIP table, Gregory Dalton leaned toward his wife and murmured, "I swear I saw her in Fortune magazine last month." Mrs. Dalton frowned. Impossible. If she were really that woman, Charlotte would never have dared. Gregory shrugged. Well, maybe Charlotte's about to regret it. A few guests quietly pulled out their phones, their fingers flying across screens as they searched in silence. Charlotte still hadn't realized that control was slipping from her grasp. She raised her glass, trying to reclaim the mood, her sharp voice slicing through the room. "You know, Lauren, in the real world, people like you are only invited to decorate the scene. And tonight you've done that role perfectly." As the last word left her lips, a soft clink echoed. Lauren's glass touched the table, the sound sharp and metallic. Slowly she turned to face the hundreds of eyes fixed on her. Some were curious, some fearful, some already filled with regret. The crystal lights shimmered across her chocolate-stained face, making her look like a warrior emerging from the ruins. "This door," Lauren said quietly. "Perhaps it truly isn't meant for me." Her voice was soft, almost like an admission, but her eyes were sharp as blades. "Because I never knock on doors that already belong to me." The room fell dead silent. Someone gasped. A glass slipped and shattered. Charlotte arched a brow, forcing a laugh that came out strangled. "Oh, how amusing." "And what exactly do you mean by that?" Lauren didn't answer. Her gaze drifted across the room, over every familiar face in the industry. Investors, bankers, directors of transport companies, executives of logistics, conglomerates. All people she knew were tied to her network through contracts, loans, or support. Was she afraid? She only saw the truth. Every single one of those laughing faces survived on the flow of capital that she controlled. A faint smile curved her lips, not the smile of vengeance, but of someone who had just realized the balance of power had quietly shifted. Across the room, Charlotte clung to her performance. She waved toward the orchestra. "All right, everyone, let's drink. Tonight belongs to us, to those who know where they belong." She emphasized the last words, her voice echoing, but instead of cheers, she was met with the creak of chairs, the rustle of silk, and a few awkward coughs. The atmosphere in that glittering room had changed entirely. Among the hundreds dressed in designer attire, only two figures truly remained, Charlotte clinging to her illusion of power, and Lauren dismantling it with silence. A long exhale escaped Lauren's lips. She looked up at the gilded ceiling, where crystal chandeliers reflected like 1,000 false stars. "How strange," she said softly, but her voice carried far. "You have all this light, yet you still need someone else's shadow to shine." Charlotte's grip tightened on her glass, anger flashing in her eyes. "What are you talking about?" Lauren didn't respond. She took one slow step forward. The light hit her face, drying the chocolate into a dark streak of armor. Every eye followed her. No one dared make a sound. From behind, Ava Sinclair whispered, "Charlotte, stop." But Charlotte ignored her. No, she needs to be taught a lesson. Then Charlotte snatched a macaron from a nearby tray and threw it at Lauren's feet. The cookie exploded on the white marble floor. Oopsie. A weak laugh flickered from somewhere in the crowd, but no one joined in. Lauren looked down at the shattered pastry. For a moment, memories flooded back the times she had been belittled before, when she was the only black student in her Harvard MBA class, when potential partners ignored her thinking she was an assistant, not the CEO. And then she smiled a smile of someone fully aware of her own power. She lifted her head, her voice calm and steady. "Charlotte, do you know the difference between us?" Charlotte laughed bitterly. "Between you and me, I'd say everything." Lauren shook her head slightly. "No. It's that I don't need an invitation to walk into this room. I build the rooms you have to ask to enter." Whispers erupted. All eyes turned to Charlotte. "What nonsense are you talking about?" Charlotte stepped back half a pace. Lauren didn't move. "Think what you will, but tomorrow morning when you check the Whitmore Heritage Fund account, you'll understand." The air froze. Charlotte's eyes widened, but Lauren had already turned away. In the back row, Gregory Dalton gasped, glancing at his phone. A news alert flashed on the screen. Nexus Freight and Tech primary investor of the Whitmore Foundation confirms complete withdrawal of funding. He looked up from Lauren to Charlotte, and he understood. The woman in the emerald gown wasn't an outsider. She was the one holding the keys. The orchestra fell silent. The lights flickered. A glass shattered, echoing like prophecy. And in the air, thick with champagne, Charlotte Whitmore felt for the first time something money had never let her taste fear. It crept slowly beneath her skin, deep and burning, starting from the heart that had only ever beaten for pride. Lauren turned back toward her, her eyes neither angry nor vengeful, but carrying a warning that needed no words. Then she turned away and walked calmly through the crowd. The crowd parted instinctively, as though every person there sensed who truly had the right to lead the way. And so beneath the dazzling lights, the Liberty Foundation Gala lost its soul. No one noticed that at that precise moment, an old door had quietly closed, and a new era had begun to open, silent but unstoppable. The sound of Charlotte's shattered glass still echoed through the air like a bell tolling for a downfall no one dared to name. Just a minute ago, the ballroom of the Astoria Grand had glimmered like a diamond throne. Now it felt more like a cathedral, after a funeral bathed in light, yet cold enough to make the soul shiver. Charlotte Whitmore stood frozen on the marble floor, her silver gown sparkling under the chandeliers like the armor of a dethroned queen. Sweat glistened along her temples. Champagne trickled down her hand in streaks of dull gold. She tried to smile, but the expression looked more like a crack than a curve. "This is ridiculous," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "It's all just a misunderstanding, right?" No one answered. The room seemed to collapse into the gravity of an invisible storm. Everyone could feel that something irreversible had happened, but no one dared to be the first to say it. Lauren Carter still stood there, needing no spotlight, no music. She didn't move yet. The entire room revolved around her presence. Her composure was unsettling. While others faltered, she was rooted in the marble itself. Every breath she took seemed to command the air, slow, deep, deliberate. A guest whispered, "Is that really Lauren Carter?" Another replied, "I just checked. CEO of Nexus Freight and Tech, net worth over $10 billion. The whispers spread like fire through dry grass. The eyes around the room began to change. The contempt was gone. In its place grew fear, the kind born when people realize they have mocked a god without knowing it. Charlotte saw it happen. She noticed how the same eyes that once worshipped her were now turning away. The loudest laughers from minutes ago were quietly stepping back. Ava Sinclair bent down to pick up her clutch. Brooke Langley stared at her phone, pretending to take an urgent call. Paige Monroe smiled weakly and slipped toward the exit. "Don't you dare!" Charlotte muttered, her voice breaking. "What are you doing?" No one replied. Lauren looked at them. Not angry, not triumphant, just with the calm understanding of someone who had seen betrayal too many times before. She spoke softly. "You know, I should thank you for tonight." The words made several heads turn. "Thank you, Charlotte," she continued. "You've shown me something money could never buy, the truth about people's hearts." Charlotte let out a laugh, brittle and choked. "Don't act like you're the victim here." You planned this, didn't you?" Lauren tilted her head slightly. "No. I just stood still. You're the one who created this spectacle." The room fell silent. Gregory Dalton braced his hands on the table, his eyes thoughtful. "Charlotte," he said slowly, "do you have any idea what you've done? The entire Whitmore Heritage Foundation runs on Nexus Freight's capital. You just humiliated the woman who controls your funding." Charlotte turned to him, her face pale. "You're lying. That's not possible." "Oh, it's possible," Gregory replied, "and she just announced the withdrawal right here." Charlotte stepped back, her eyes trembling as she looked at Lauren like she was seeing a ghost. "No, you wouldn't dare." Lauren met her gaze, her voice light as air, but heavy as a verdict. "I already did." A collective gasp swept through the room. The guests began whispering, screens lighting up as fingers typed frantically. News traveled faster than breath. Lauren Carter pulls $7.8 billion from Whitmore Foundation Gala in chaos. Imagined headlines flickered through their minds, soon to become reality. Charlotte looked around, desperate for an ally, but every familiar face, the ones who had toasted her, the ones who had praised her, now avoided her eyes. "Ava," she called out, her voice trembling. "You're not going to leave me, are you?" Ava gave a faint smile, colder than ice. "Me, oh Charlotte, you know I had nothing to do with this." Then she turned and walked away. Charlotte looked around wildly. Brooke, Paige. But they were already gone into the crowd. The cruel truth of the elite loyalty lasts only as long as the balance in the bank account. Lauren remained still. No shouting, no threats. Her silence was the loudest judgment of all. Charlotte grabbed the orchestra's microphone, her voice shaking. "Everyone, please listen. This is all a misunderstanding. I'll talk to her. I'll fix this. Don't believe these ridiculous rumors." But no one listened. Everyone was on their phones, calling, texting, trying to save their stocks, their funds, their fortunes. Lauren stepped forward. The click of her heels echoed, measured firm, like the ticking of a courtroom clock before a sentence. Charlotte backed away instinctively, her spine pressing against a marble column. "What do you want?" she whispered, her voice small, stripped of power. Lauren stopped, her eyes softening. "I don't want anything. I just want you to understand, this power doesn't come from making people fear you. It comes from earning their respect, even when you have nothing left to give." The words weren't only for Charlotte. They filled the room, drifting through sequined dresses and painted smiles, piercing the hearts of those who had once laughed. A few people lowered their heads. Some wiped sweat from their brows. And for the first time, a few felt shame. The microphone slipped from Charlotte's trembling hand, clattering to the floor with a sharp clang that echoed to the vaulted ceiling. Lauren turned and walked away. The crowd parted instinctively, like water splitting before a ship's bow. No one spoke. No one dared touch her. As she crossed the threshold, light from the hallway bathed her in a soft golden glow, the kind of light that follows victory without applause. Behind her in the grand ballroom that had once overflowed with laughter, only the muffled sobs of Charlotte Whitmore remained a fallen queen within the kingdom she built herself. That night, New York had never been so silent. Because everyone understood, they had just witnessed not only the fall of a woman, but the collapse of an entire order, one where power was inherited, not earned through dignity. And in that quiet darkness, Lauren Carter walked away, her heels echoing like the heartbeat of a new era. The news exploded across the internet before Lauren even made it out of the main hall of the Astoria Grand. Headlines flashed across glowing phone screens like blades, slicing through the elegant air of the gala night. Lauren Carter, CEO of Nexus Freight and Tech, withdraws $7.8 billion from the Whitmore Foundation. Shock at the Liberty Gala. Host Charlotte Whitmore humiliates her largest investor. Notification sounds, buzzing phones, and panicked voices filled the room. The Golden Ballroom turned into a stock exchange floor in crisis within seconds. Charlotte Whitmore still stood at the center, her silver heels sinking slightly into a puddle of spilled champagne. Her hair was disheveled, her red lipstick smeared. The chandelier's light above reflected off her like a cracked statue, still glittering but coming apart. "No, it's not possible," she whispered, her voice hoarse, strangled. She wouldn't dare. But Lauren had dared. Lauren Carter walked out of the ballroom, but not out of the building. She stopped in the red-carpeted hallway, where a flood of reporters had already gathered. Camera flashes exploded like lightning, and questions poured down like rain. "Dr. Carter, have you really withdrawn all your investment? Do you have any comment for Charlotte Whitmore? Do you believe this move will shake New York's financial world?" Lauren stopped and turned her head slowly. No one in that crowd could believe that the woman who had been hit in the face with a cake just an hour earlier could still stand tall, calm and commanding. The camera lights glinted against the traces of dried chocolate on her face, like battle scars. Her voice was low and clear, not loud, yet powerful enough to silence the entire corridor. Dignity is not a commodity, and power is not a crown to be inherited. It is the truth we are willing to stand for, even when the world is laughing. No one said another word. Even the most seasoned reporters knew they had just heard something greater than a statement. It was a declaration. Lauren turned away, leaving behind a silence that stretched through the hall like a tide. Back inside the ballroom, Charlotte clung desperately to the last fragments of her reputation. She grabbed her phone and called her father, real estate tycoon Thomas Whitmore. Dad, Nexus Freight just pulled all their funding. The entire foundation is collapsing. On the other end came only silence, then a voice deep and heavy as stone. "Charlotte, what have you done? I just wanted to teach her a lesson. Someone like her doesn't be quiet." His voice was ice, freezing her in place. "You just insulted the woman who controls the financial coordination of 15 companies our family does business with. Do you understand what that means? Every credit line we have will be frozen before sunrise." Charlotte's strength left her. The phone slipped from her hand and hit the marble floor. Around her, the hum of panicked conversation rose. The same guests who had laughed with her earlier now huddled in corners whispering. No one approached. Gregory Dalton, once a strategic partner of the Whitmore dynasty, looked at her and shook his head. "Charlotte, this world has no place left for inherited power. It's evolving, and tonight the old monster has devoured itself." The word struck her like a blade. She collapsed into a chair, her wide eyes staring into nothing. Meanwhile, outside the hotel, Lauren Carter sat quietly in the back of a black limousine. She said nothing. Outside, reporters crowded the gates. Inside, she looked down at her hands, the same hands that once trembled when she started her business with 2 employees in a small garage in Brooklyn. She remembered the days she was denied loans because she didn't fit the profile of a business leader. She remembered the condescending looks from those who once said, "You'd make a better assistant than a CEO." And now, through the tinted glass, she saw those same faces pressing forward, fighting to capture her photo, with eyes full of fear and admiration. A dried bit of chocolate flaked from her chin and fell onto her dress. She smiled softly. "Not bad for a stain," she murmured, half amused, half reflective. Her assistant Renee turned from the front seat and asked quietly, "Do you regret it?" Lauren shook her head. "No, I just feel sad. Sad for Charlotte. No, sad for people who think belittling others makes them taller." The glow of the streetlights washed across her face, half gold, half cool grey. It was the face of someone who had been tested, had fallen and learned how to rise without shouting. Meanwhile, inside the Astoria Grand, another battlefield was unfolding. The remaining reporters rushed in, flashes bursting like fireworks. Charlotte tried to sit upright, but her shoulders shook. She ran her fingers through her hair, trying to regain a trace of composure. One journalist approached. "Ms. Whitmore, do you have any comment about losing your investment?" Charlotte opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her voice broke into a rasping whisper. "I'll get it all back. She'll have to apologize." But no one was listening. Behind her, the grand portrait of her ancestor, a smug-faced gentleman in oil paint, seemed to watch her with silent mockery. A cracking sound echoed. The glass frame splintered. A small shard broke loose and fell shattering on the floor. No one spoke, but everyone understood the symbol of Whitmore power had just cracked for real, and in spirit. By dawn, every major newspaper carried the same headline, "Charlotte Whitmore, the fall of a silver queen." In the photograph, she was seen bowing her head, her silver gown dishevelled, the lights glinting like a funeral shroud. And in the distance among the crowd of photographers stood Lauren Carter in her emerald dress, calm, expressionless, neither smiling nor angry, only carrying the stillness of someone who knew she had done what was right. The story spread across America. Millions watched the video of the dethroned queen. Yet amid the media storm, what people remembered most was not the billions withdrawn, but the moment Lauren stood still without revenge, without a harsh word, allowing the world to reveal its own reflection. That evening, as the city settled into silence, Lauren stood alone by the window of her high-rise apartment, gazing out over the glowing lights of Manhattan. She exhaled softly and set her teacup down. "Tomorrow," she said quietly, "everyone will talk about money. But what I hope they remember is that silence, when held with dignity, can shake an empire." And as the first light of dawn rose behind the skyline, Lauren Carter smiled not the smile of a conqueror, but of someone who understood that sometimes silence is the only thunder the world will ever hear. The morning after the gala, the sky over Manhattan hung heavy, as if the city itself was burdened by a confession it didn't want to make. The headlines spread across every newspaper, each line as cold and precise as a surgeon's blade. The Whitmore Corporation, on the brink of collapse after Nexus Freight and Tech withdraws $7.8 billion. Charlotte Whitmore loses control board, demands her resignation. Lauren Carter, the woman who made high society bow. Every headline was a bullet, and none were aimed at Lauren. They pierced through all those who had laughed at her that night. In her apartment on the 58th floor of Nexus Tower, Lauren Carter sat by the wide window, holding a cup of coffee. Below her, the city was waking up, cars flowing through the streets, sunlight glinting off the Hudson River. She didn't feel victorious. She felt peaceful, the kind of peace one only earns after walking through hell. On the table lay a neatly printed financial report. Her signature marked the bottom of the final page. The withdrawal order had been executed irreversible. Her assistant, Renee, entered the room. The morning news is everywhere. Every network is calling you the woman of justice. The New York Times wants an exclusive interview. Lauren set her cup down, her voice soft as a sigh. "Decline it." Renee paused. "Why, this could be a great opportunity." Lauren smiled faintly, interrupting. "I don't need to prove anything. The people who needed a lesson have already learned it." Renee said nothing more. She knew that Lauren had never sought fame. She had only protected what others had tried, to strip away her dignity. Meanwhile, across the city, the Whitmore mansion was eerily silent. The staff moved quietly, gathering their things. Reporters crowded behind the iron gates. On the second floor, Charlotte Whitmore sat in her office, her phone ringing endlessly, but she no longer had the strength to answer. A new message flashed across the screen. "Charlotte, the board has voted. You are officially suspended. Emergency meeting this morning." She let out a weak laugh, hollow and brittle, like wind passing through an empty bottle. Everything she once believed was permanent. Her name, her power, her place had vanished in mere hours. Sunlight slipped through the curtains, striking a framed photo on the desk. Her father shaking hands with Lauren Carter a year earlier, a photo once proudly displayed in the company's lobby, now turned face down. Charlotte picked it up. In the picture, Lauren wore a white suit, her smile calm and confident. Charlotte, beside her in a silver gown, smiled too, a strained smile laced with pride. "You always looked at me that way," Charlotte whispered, "as if you already knew I would destroy myself one day." The first tear slid down her cheek. At that same moment, on the 60th floor of Nexus Freight and Tech headquarters, the conference room was packed with reporters and executives. Lauren walked in her steps, steady her face, bare of makeup, carrying only the quiet authority of a woman who had weathered storms. Camera flashes erupted. Dozens of recorders were lifted toward her. A reporter called out, "Dr. Carter, do you regret your decision knowing it caused the fall of an entire family empire. Lauren took a seat, then replied slowly, "Regret, no. I didn't make them fall. They dug that hole long ago. I merely stopped funding cruelty." The room fell silent. She continued, her tone calm but firm. "We live in an age where people confuse success with privilege. I didn't attend that gala to display power. I went because I still believed goodwill existed. But when I was humiliated, I didn't scream. I didn't retaliate. I simply withdrew what they no longer deserved." Then she looked straight into the cameras, her gaze sharp as forged steel. They thought my silence was weakness. They forgot that sometimes silence is the power that makes the world stop and listen. Her words went live across every major network. Millions watched. Thousands of comments poured in. "She's the embodiment of dignity. This isn't revenge, it's justice. A new era of women in leadership." Lauren only smiled faintly, then stepped down from the podium. That afternoon, the sky broke open and rain began to fall. The first rain in weeks, as if nature itself wanted to wash away the dust of vanity left from the gala. Charlotte sat in her car, staring through the fogged window. She was on her way to the board meeting, the meeting she knew would end everything. On the seat beside her, the phone buzzed again. A message from an old friend appeared. "I'm sorry it came to this, Charlotte. But maybe you should apologize publicly. Sometimes bowing your head isn't a loss. It's the only way to save what's human inside." She stared at the screen, her fingers trembling. Apologize. A word she had never spoken sincerely in her entire life. The car stopped in front of Whitmore Holdings. Inside, the directors were already waiting. Their eyes were cold, detached, as if they were discussing the removal of a failing branch, not a person. When she entered, no one greeted her. The chairman's voice cut through the room. "Charlotte, you know what we have to do." She nodded. No pleading, no defense. She signed the resignation papers, her hand trembling slightly. As she lifted the pen, a single tear fell landing on the page. And in that moment, she understood. True power had never been about making others afraid, but about earning respect, even when you have nothing left. That evening, Lauren received a short email. From Charlotte Whitmore. Subject: no excuses. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted to say you were right. I was wrong. Thank you for forcing me to see myself." Lauren read the message, sitting in silence for a long while. Finally, she typed 7 simple words. "Everyone deserves a chance to begin again." She pressed send, then leaned back and closed her eyes. Outside, the rain still fell. The city lights reflected in the glass like a torn galaxy, broken yet beautiful. That night in a sleepless Manhattan, 2 women, one who had lost everything and one who had reclaimed justice, came to the same realization. True victory is not in making others fall, but in making the whole world listen when you speak only through silence. 7 days after the gala, Manhattan woke up with a different kind of breath. The newspapers still printed Lauren Carter's image, but the story was no longer a scandal. It had become a symbol. The cover of Forbes that morning read, "The woman who made America relearn the meaning of dignity, Lauren Carter." In the photo, she wasn't standing beneath bright lights, but sitting quietly by her office window, the morning sun soft on her serene face. A faint smile lingered on her lips, just enough to reveal that there was no pride in it, only peace. On the 60th floor of Nexus Freight and Tech headquarters, the air was unusually calm. Lauren walked along the hallway, her hand brushing the framed photos that lined the wall, each one capturing a chapter of the company's journey from a cramped garage in Brooklyn to the vast glass towers of today. Every photo held a story, a scar, a triumph. Renee approached with a stack of folders in hand. "Ms. Lauren," she said, "everything's settled. Investors are rushing back to collaborate. Several organizations want to invite you to speak about leadership and dignity." Lauren stopped in front of the last photo, a picture from last year's gala, when Charlotte was still the symbol of power. She looked at it for a long moment, then spoke softly. "Renee, do you know what the saddest part of all this is? Watching intelligent, talented people forget how to be human." Renee nodded gently. "But you reminded them." Lauren smiled faintly. "No, I just stood still. Their own actions made them see themselves." Meanwhile, in the suburbs of Connecticut, the Whitmore estate had turned into a silent shell of its former self. Charlotte lived quietly now. No staff, no press, no parties. Every morning she made herself a cup of coffee, opened her laptop and read the news about the people who used to be her friends. They were still attending galas, still smiling in photographs, but no one mentioned her name. She had vanished from guest lists, charity boards, and glossy magazines that once hailed her as New York's icon of elegance. Some nights, Charlotte sat alone on the porch, staring at the distant city lights. Cold rain tapped against the roof. She thought about that night, the laughter, the lights, the cake, and Lauren's calm gaze amid the chaos. Now she understood that gaze wasn't one of defeat. It was the look of someone who had already seen the ending long before it began. One afternoon, Charlotte decided to leave the house. She drove to a small community center in Harlem, where a program for women entrepreneurs was being held. The sign out front read, "Workshop Leading with Kindness speaker Lauren Carter." She parked her hands, gripping the steering wheel. Part of her wanted to turn back, but something deeper whispered, "Go in, Charlotte. Don't let pride keep you prisoner forever." She walked inside and quietly took a seat in the back row. No one recognized her. Her once luxurious blonde hair was now cropped short, her glamorous gowns replaced by a simple coat. On stage, Lauren stood before hundreds of women, her voice calm and warm. "There will be rooms that throw you out. There will be people who say you don't belong at their table. But remember this, if they won't open their doors for you, build your own room. And one day, they'll be the ones knocking to come in." The crowd erupted in applause. Charlotte watched, her eyes stinging. Those words, nearly the same ones Lauren had spoken that night, now sounded different. They weren't retribution. They were an invitation for those once humiliated to rise again. When the event ended, Charlotte stayed seated. People crowded around Lauren for photos and autographs. Lauren greeted everyone with warmth, no trace of the powerful CEO who had brought an empire to its knees. When the room finally cleared, Charlotte stood and walked toward the stage, her heart pounding. Lauren was gathering her papers when she noticed her. For a brief second, she froze, then smiled. Charlotte. Lauren. Both women stood in silence for a long moment. Finally, Charlotte spoke, her voice trembling. "I didn't come to ask for forgiveness. I just wanted to say thank you for not using silence as revenge." Lauren looked at her deeply. "I never wanted to destroy you, Charlotte. I just wanted you to see yourself the way I once had to see myself." Charlotte nodded softly. 2 tears fell, not from shame, but from release. "I spent my whole life trapped in a cage, built from false pride. I want to start over, but I don't know where to begin." Lauren placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, a touch that felt like forgiveness. Start by being kind to yourself. Then let that kindness reach others. Charlotte smiled, the first genuine smile in months. Do you think I can? Lauren replied quietly, but with conviction. Anyone brave enough to face their own mistakes has a chance to begin again. As Charlotte left, the golden light of sunset poured through the glass windows, filling the room with warmth. Lauren stood watching her go, her heart light. Renee stepped up beside her and whispered, "You know, I never thought you'd see her again." Lauren smiled. The world is vast, but never wide enough to outrun conscience. She turned back toward the stage where the words, "leading with kindness," still glowed. Each letter reflected her story, a woman who had proven that kindness isn't weakness, but the highest form of power. That night, Charlotte returned home. She opened her laptop and began deleting old photos, flattering articles, the glossy images from extravagant galas. At last, she opened a blank document and typed the first line, "Day 1, learning to listen." She saved the file and turned off the light. Outside, rain began to fall again. But this time she didn't feel cold. Across the city, Lauren sat by her window, gazing at the glowing skyline of Manhattan. Her phone buzzed with a new message from Renee. "The video from your workshop just hit 5 million views. People are calling you the Silent Storm." Lauren smiled. She knew that name wasn't just about her. It belonged to all those who had once been pushed into the shadows, those who had chosen silence not out of weakness, but because they knew that one day that silence would become the thunder that wakes the world. And that night, beneath the countless twinkling lights of New York, 2 women remained awake, one writing her new beginning, the other resting in quiet peace. 2 paths. One lesson: power may make people bow, but only dignity can make them rise. That morning, Manhattan felt renewed. Sunlight danced across the glass towers, reflecting brighter than ever, as if the city had never known a storm. The world believed the chaos had passed, but in truth, it was only the prelude to an awakening. When Lauren Carter arrived at her office, the communications team was already waiting. Renee walked beside her, speaking quickly but calmly. "Ms. Lauren, urgent news. A chain of corporations is sending formal letters of apology. And several universities, they want to invite you as the commencement speaker this year." Lauren set her bag down on the desk, arching a brow. "A commencement speaker?" Renee nodded. "They said you're proof that power can wear a calm face." Lauren chuckled softly. "The world moves fast. Yesterday they mocked me. Today they want me to teach them how to live." Renee smiled. "Maybe that's the price of being right, even when you're right in silence." The words lingered. Lauren thought of Charlotte's eyes a week ago, the eyes of someone seeing her true self for the first time. No longer hateful or proud, just human, standing among the ashes, learning how to live again. At noon, Lauren attended a private meeting with the city's economic committee. The boardroom on the 70th floor opened to the sky through its glass ceiling. Reporters crowded outside, fighting to capture every handshake. The mayor, James Holloway, a dignified older man, began Dr. Carter on behalf of the city. "I want to thank you. Your story has forced our society to reconsider how we worship power and forget humanity." Lauren smiled graciously. "I only did what anyone could do, refusing to stay silent in the face of contempt. But I do hope that next time, no one has to spend $7.8 billion just to be heard." The room fell quiet for a moment. Then the mayor nodded slowly. "You didn't just reclaim your dignity. You reclaimed it for everyone who has ever been looked down on." Lauren replied gently, "I only hope they remember that silence is not surrender. Sometimes it's the highest form of control." Meanwhile, across the city, Charlotte Whitmore sat in a small cafe. She no longer wore makeup or diamond watches. In front of her was an old laptop and a notepad labeled Community Startup Project, supporting women's reintegration. The barista, a young woman named Leah, recognized her. "You're Charlotte Whitmore, right Businesswoman of the Year last year." Charlotte smiled softly, unbothered. "I was." "Now I'm just Charlotte." Leah hesitated. "I saw the video of that gala. I think if it were me, I'd never show my face again." Charlotte shook her head gently. "I thought that too. But then I realized sometimes you have to lose everything before you learn how to live truthfully." The word silenced the young woman. Charlotte looked down at her notes, where she had written in her own handwriting Whitmore Rebuild Foundation, a non-profit for those publicly humiliated, helping them regain dignity and opportunity. She smiled to herself. No one clapped when she walked into a room anymore, but for the first time in her life, she felt she was walking the right way. 3 weeks later, Lauren received an invitation to speak at Columbia University's commencement. The theme for this year, Dignity in the Age of Power. She sat at her desk writing every word of her speech by hand, refusing to let anyone else write it for her. On the day of the ceremony, Columbia's courtyard overflowed with people, students, faculty journalists, even strangers who only knew her story. The June breeze was cool, flags waved gently, and sunlight glinted off Lauren's dark hair as she stepped onto the stage. She looked out at thousands of young faces, eyes bright with hope. Her voice, calm and warm, began, "My friends, I'm not here to talk about success. Success is only the visible tip of the iceberg. I want to talk about the wounds we hide, the times we're dismissed, excluded, or laughed at, because those wounds, if met with dignity, can turn into strength." A soft wind passed through the crowd as she continued. "Someone once told me, you don't belong here. But today, I want to tell you this. Every place you enter with respect and honesty is a place you belong." Applause broke out, rolling through the courtyard like waves. She paused, letting silence settle again, the kind of silence she understood better than anyone. Then she spoke quietly. "Silence is not weakness. Silence is the choice of those who know that truth will always travel farther than any shout." In the third row, Charlotte sat unnoticed among the crowd, tears streaming down her face. She had come unannounced. No one recognized her. When Lauren looked toward the audience, their eyes met. A small nod passed between them, not an apology, but gratitude. That evening after the ceremony, Lauren walked toward the parking lot. There she saw Charlotte, waiting. "You came," Lauren said, her voice light as a breeze. "I had to," Charlotte replied. "I wanted to hear from you what I refused to hear that night." They stood quietly for a moment. Then Charlotte spoke again, slowly. "I founded the Whitmore Rebuild Foundation. It's small, but it helps women like me, women who've been humiliated, find their confidence again." Lauren smiled. "I knew you'd do something good. Maybe that night saved both of us." Charlotte laughed softly, her eyes glistening. "Do you really think the world can change?" Lauren looked toward the distance where the Manhattan skyline was glowing into twilight. The world doesn't change overnight, but every time someone chooses dignity over dominance, it changes a little. Charlotte nodded. They both turned to watch the graduates streaming out of the gates, full of dreams and promise. Maybe Charlotte whispered, "That's how real thunder sounds, not roaring in the sky, but echoing in the hearts of those who choose kindness." Lauren smiled gently. "Yes, and if the sky is quiet today, it's only so that thunder can be heard more clearly." The two women, once enemies, now stood side by side in the purple dusk. No handshake, no apology, only silence. Because both knew that forgiveness had already happened long ago, in the moment they looked at each other and saw no one beneath the other. As Lauren walked away, Charlotte remained in the courtyard, looking up at the sky. The first summer breeze swept past, carrying the blue ribbons of the ceremony high into the air. She smiled, not the smile of a fallen queen, but of a woman who had finally learned what she never understood before: dignity is not something we win. It is something we keep, even after everything else is gone. 1 month after the graduation ceremony, the story of Lauren Carter was no longer news. It had become legend. Schools began including her name in lectures on ethical leadership, and companies hung her words on their boardroom walls. Power doesn't live in a shout, but in the calm of someone who knows they are right. Meanwhile, in Harlem, an old brick house had been freshly painted. The sign at the door read, "Whitmore Rebuild Foundation." Charlotte stood there, welcoming the first women seeking help, those scarred by ridicule, discrimination, and judgment. She no longer wore silver gowns or glittering jewelry, but as she helped a young woman rewrite her resume, Charlotte realized that for the first time in her life, she truly felt valuable. Across the city, Lauren sat by the high window of her office, gazing down at Manhattan. Renee entered quietly and said, "Lauren, there's news. The government wants to partner with Nexus on a new program called Empathy Leadership. They want to name the initiative after you." Lauren smiled, her eyes soft, yet profound. "If it helps the world become kinder, I'll agree. But only if it doesn't carry my name. Let it bear the name of everyone who was ever looked down on, yet still chose to stand tall." She turned toward the window. The sunset spilled gold over the skyscrapers, coating every crack in light. In the heart of the city, two women, one who had once destroyed and one who had once been humiliated, were now rebuilding the world in their own ways. There was no mocking laughter, no artificial spotlight, only two things that remained after every storm: dignity and change. And as night descended over Manhattan, Lauren gently closed her eyes and smiled. She didn't need to defeat anyone. She had conquered the cruelest thing within humanity, the silence of fear. Now that silence had become her legacy, and the world had finally learned how to listen. A year had passed since that fateful gala night. Manhattan once again hosted the annual Icon of the Year awards. On stage, the white spotlight fell upon a woman in an emerald blue gown, simple, without jewelry, without display. Lauren Carter walked forward amid thunderous applause. The host announced, "Tonight's award is not only for achievement, but for the woman who taught the world that true power begins with respect." Lauren accepted the crystal trophy, her gaze calm and gentle. "Thank you," she began, her voice warm and steady. "A year ago, I was humiliated in front of a crowd, and they thought they had made me small. But sometimes, the very moment you are diminished is the moment you are reminded that you can rise higher than the pain." In the audience, Charlotte sat among the guests, quietly smiling. She wore a small pin of the Whitmore Rebuild Foundation on her lapel, the symbol of a program that had helped hundreds of women rebuild their lives. Lauren continued, her eyes sweeping across the hall. Dignity is not something that can be taken from you. It only disappears when you choose to surrender it. If one day you are pushed down, do not respond with anger. Respond with composure, because there are still people in this world who listen to silence. The entire hall rose to its feet. Applause merged with the soft sound of violins, echoing like an act of redemption for all the years humanity had forgotten compassion. As Lauren stepped down from the stage, Charlotte approached and extended her hand. No words were spoken, but within that handshake was the quiet connection of two souls who had once stood on opposite sides, now standing together in the light. Outside the hall, the first snow of the season began to fall. Under the golden glow of the street lamps, the two women looked up at the sky. There were no winners, no losers, only two human beings who had finally found themselves again. From the perspective of an expert in ethical leadership, Lauren Carter's journey is not merely a story about the consequences of arrogance, but a testament that dignity holds a power greater than any form of authority. When a person learns to preserve their self-respect in the midst of a storm, they not only protect themselves, but also redefine the standard of a world that once forgot the meaning of respect. This was not a victory of wealth, but a victory of humanity, of compassion, intellect, and composure. If you believe that dignity is the true foundation of success, then, like this video to share that value, subscribe to the channel so you won't miss more stories where people are tested by power, and comment below the phrase that represents your belief: hold your dignity.